Welcome back to Trader UK, Adam here. Today I want to talk to you about what I consider to be Bitcoin's strongest headwind at the moment. Surprisingly, it's not fraud, it's not competition from other cryptocurrencies, and it's not more regulation that I'm worried about, it's tax. Now, I want to start the video by saying I'm bullish on Bitcoin. It makes up about 8% of my portfolio at the moment, so don't think that this is in any way a dig at Bitcoin. Rather, it's an opportunity to look at how Bitcoin will find its value in the future. Now, here at the time of making this video, look at this. Bitcoin is sitting here around the $50,000 mark. Tesla have already announced their investment in Bitcoin and their plans to accept it as a payment method moving forward. MasterCard and Apple have both discussed it as well and said that they plan to integrate Bitcoin payments into their system. So it does seem like we're at the start of kind of a widespread shift towards Bitcoin becoming a commonly accepted payment method, which is the overall goal, remember. Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency. So really, what we're going to look at today is how, even though these companies might want you to start making payments with Bitcoin, tax law is unfortunately going to put a stop to that pretty much straight away. And at first, it does kind of seem like governments are fairly supportive of cryptocurrencies, certainly some of them anyway. A few countries have got an outright ban, but certainly in the UK and the US, it doesn't look like the route they're going down. It's important to remember though, apart from an outright ban, there's not too much that governments can really do to stop Bitcoin becoming accepted as a payment method. They can't really stop a retailer from accepting Bitcoin in exchange for goods and services, just like they can't really stop a retailer from accepting coffee in exchange for goods and services. What they can do though is decide if Bitcoin should actually be recognized as a currency, which is different from it being a payment method like we're seeing with Tesla, Apple, MasterCard. In the case of the UK, HMRC have already decided that cryptocurrencies will not be recognized or are not recognized as currencies at the moment, despite the name and despite that being the overall aim of Bitcoin. And to be honest, that classification isn't anything new and it hasn't stopped people from investing in Bitcoin, and that's not really the intention. It's purely to ensure that governments get their fair share of all these crypto gains that are building up, and they'll get that in the form of tax revenue. But in the long run, it could be this classification that ends up putting consumers, everyday consumers, off using Bitcoin as a payment method. And it could mean that you won't end up using Bitcoin to pay for your shopping, to pay for a car, and to take on holiday with you. You see, in the UK, if you hold foreign currency in a foreign currency bank account and it appreciates against the pound and increases in value, then when you convert it back, you might expect to pay some tax on the gain that you've made. But actually, there's a piece of tax law from 2012 that means gains of that nature are actually exempt from tax. So people would probably argue that Bitcoin, or people do argue, Bitcoin is a digital currency and the Bitcoin wallet is like a bank account. So Bitcoin should be treated in the same way and any gain should be exempt from tax. Of course, it won't surprise you to learn that HMRC didn't like that approach and they decided against it. If they did, if they went down that route, they'd be throwing away the tax and all these gains that people have made, which will be hundreds of millions, and will probably end up potentially being billions of pounds worth of tax revenue. So in the eyes of HMRC, Bitcoin is not a currency, and that means that actually the vast majority of retail investors like you and I would be taxed under capital gains tax rules. And to be honest, on the face of it, that's not so bad. A lot of people will point out that capital gains tax rules in the UK are quite generous. You can earn £12,300 tax-free to start with, and then after that you're only taxed at 10 or 20%, which is half the rate of income tax. Now, despite HMRC saying that Bitcoin isn't a currency, we're already seeing these moves from Tesla, from MasterCard, from Apple to normalize Bitcoin as a payment method. And we're getting much closer to being able to pay for everyday expenses using our Bitcoin, irrelevant of it not being recognized as an actual currency by HMRC. And this is actually where that classification from HMRC could end up holding us back. Look at this. So this is the detailed tax guidance from HMRC on cryptocurrency. It states that If you swap your Bitcoin for goods or services, then that will count as a disposal. So by using your Bitcoin as a payment method, you are crystallizing a gain. And you would have to consider tax each time that you make a payment with Bitcoin. Essentially, for every single Bitcoin payment you would make, you would have to say, well, £20 of groceries cost me 0.001 Bitcoin. That 0.001 Bitcoin originally cost me £1, so I've realised a gain of £19. And you'd have to do that for every single Bitcoin transaction that you make. And if your total Bitcoin gains that relate to the Bitcoin that you've just spent add up to more than your capital gains tax allowance in any tax year, then you would actually have to share those calculations with HMRC and complete a self-assessment tax return. You'll also find a video on my channel, which I'm going to link in a card for you, that talks about a potential rethink of capital gains tax rules by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, where it was suggested in that video that the capital gains allowance could be removed altogether. Now, if that were the case, then there would be no tax-free allowance, so you would potentially need to declare every single gain to HMRC on a self-assessment. And based on how Bitcoin has performed previously, that would mean completing a tax return, even if you only made one Bitcoin payment in a tax year. You also have to remember that the vast majority of people are not happy with calculating capital gains or submitting forms to HMRC, so no doubt that process would involve paying for an accountant. So this begs the question, apart from your hardcore Bitcoin adopters and those who are comfortable with dealing with tax and capital gains of HMRC, would your everyday consumer adopt Bitcoin as a payment method, or would they just stick to the pound sterling, where they know they don't have to worry about capital gains, they know they definitely won't need to submit a tax return to HMRC just because they bought a Tesla using their Bitcoin or they paid for their groceries using their Bitcoin? Knowing all of this, it's actually quite unlikely under the current regime that you're going to see widespread use of Bitcoin in the UK as a payment method. Under the current system anyway. You'll probably see some people adopting it anyway, but it could really end up being a headache if you use Bitcoin on a regular basis. Now, that isn't to say that Bitcoin holds no value just because the UK could potentially tax people when they spend their Bitcoin. The UK is a very small part of the global economy, and each country will set up their own tax treatment, but it could cause problems if more countries decide to take a similar approach. I'm also assuming here that Bitcoin's only value is derived from its potential use as a future payment method. And all honesty, I don't know if that's the case anymore. I don't think that anybody really knows. But this is why you'll see a lot of investors referring to Bitcoin as digital gold, because they feel that even if it doesn't fulfill its original purpose, that it still holds value there. It's certainly interesting though to see how governments can kind of steer you away from something without actually banning you from using it. And remember, it also says in that guidance that the treatment of cryptocurrencies is constantly under review. So maybe as cryptocurrencies become more prevalent in mainstream society, we'll see changes to that tax regime. I'd certainly be interested to hear your thoughts on this one down in the comments. If you are holding Bitcoin, do you think that Bitcoin's value comes from its potential use as a global payment method, or do you think that Bitcoin still holds value without that application? That's all for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.